Wildfire. A fire big enough stops behaving like a fire. Heat above the burning zone rises hard, air rushes in underneath, and the fire starts running its own weather. It makes weather. On the 26th of July, 2018, at 7:39 in the evening, that happened over Redding, California. The plume above the car fire climbed from 4 miles to 7 miles in 15 minutes, and a column of rotating flame formed underneath it, about 1,000 feet across at the base. The National Weather Service put the winds above 143 miles an hour. That is an EF3 tornado. CAL FIRE's own report estimated 136 to 165. It lifted steel power line towers. It lifted vehicles. It lifted a steel shipping container. Jeremy Stoke, a fire prevention inspector with the Redding Fire Department, was caught inside it and killed. Quick thing before we keep going. If you are into this, subscribe, like, and drop a comment. It genuinely helps the channel. A fire that size does something else. It builds a thunderstorm out of its own smoke, and that storm makes lightning. Fire makes lightning. On Black Saturday in Australia in 2009, one of those storms started a new fire 60 miles downwind. Too far for embers, the fire had stopped spreading and started reproducing. Hailstorm. Inside a severe thunderstorm, the updraft can run over 160 miles an hour. That is fast enough to hold a lump of ice in the air, while more water freezes onto it, layer after layer. The sky throws rocks. On the 23rd of July, 2010, one came down at Vivian, South Dakota. Les Scott found it and put it in his freezer. The storm knocked the power out, the freezer thawed, and by the time anyone measured it the next morning, it had already shrunk. It still came in at 8 inches across and just under 2 pounds. It is the American record, and the committee that certified it wrote that the stone was almost certainly larger when it landed. Here is the part nearly everyone has wrong. You have probably heard the layers inside a hailstone count. It's trips up and down through the storm. They are not trips. The National Severe Storms Laboratory says so directly. Cloudy layers mean the water froze fast and trapped air. Clear layers mean it froze slowly. What those rings record is temperature and cloud water at each stage of the stone's path. It is a thermometer. The deadliest hailstorm ever recorded fell on Moradabad, India on the 30th of April, 1888. It killed 246 people and 1,600 head of livestock in one afternoon. Avalanche. More than 9 out of 10 avalanche deaths come from one kind. The slab, a whole plate of snow, releases at once, roughly 50 yards across, and it is doing 60 to 80 miles an hour within about 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Ahead of it runs a blast of air. It has been measured, and it is weaker than people assume, under half a pound per square inch. That is enough to snap trees. It is nowhere near enough to flatten a building. Buildings are flattened by the snow itself, which the Swiss have clocked hitting at more than 400 times the pressure of that air blast. Now the number that matters, and it is the one almost every article gets wrong. Falk, Brugger, and Adler-Kastner published the survival curve in Nature, 1994. If you are buried, your chance of coming out alive holds above 91% for the first 18 minutes. Then it collapses. By 35 minutes, it is 34%, 91 down to 34 in 17 minutes, which means the person who digs you out is the person standing next to you. No helicopter arrives inside 18 minutes. And the cold is not what kills. Of 204 Canadian avalanche deaths studied, 3/4 were asphyxia, a quarter were trauma, and exactly 2 people died of hypothermia. Dust storm. The Sahara holds about 3.5 million square miles of loose sediment with nothing holding it down. Get the right pressure gradient and the wind lifts millions of tons of it at once. The largest kind is called a haboob, from the Arabic for blowing. It can stand a mile high, run 100 miles wide, and move at 30 to 40 miles an hour. It is not weather. It does not look like weather approaching. It looks like the sky turning solid. On the 14th of April, 1935, one of them crossed the American plains. Liberal Kansas at 4 in the afternoon, Boise City, Oklahoma at 5:15, Oklahoma City at 7:15. At Amarillo, the visibility was 0 for 12 minutes. At Dodge City, it was 0 for 20 and then under 10 feet for another 45. A farm woman named Pauline Winkler Gray watched it come. She wrote that the sky had split into 2 opposite worlds, blue sky and golden sunlight on the south, and on the north, a menacing curtain of boiling black dust. It had the appearance, she said, of a mammoth waterfall in reverse. The name was born. An Associated Press reporter called Robert Geiger was caught 6 miles outside Boise City that afternoon. The story he filed next morning used a phrase nobody had printed before, the Dust Bowl. Earthquake. Rock along a plate boundary bends and holds for centuries, and then it stops holding. What the ground does is not shaking. It rolls, it heaves, it lurches sideways, and buildings are not built to move sideways. On the night of the 23rd of January, 1556, that happened under Shanxi province in central China. They were asleep. Most people there lived in Yaodong, homes cut straight into cliffs of loess, the fine wind-blown soil that covers that part of the country. Loess stands up beautifully until something shakes it. Then it comes down on top of whoever is inside. The imperial record counted 830,000 dead. It is still the deadliest earthquake ever recorded. Modern seismologists think perhaps 100,000 died in the shaking itself, and the rest in the famine and the plague behind it. Satellites have since mapped 3,564 landslides from that one night, still sitting on the hillsides. Somebody wrote it down. A scholar named Chin Keda survived and left an account of it. He described the roof tiles above his bed crashing like 10,000 horses. And he noticed something. The people who ran outside were crushed by falling walls. The people who stayed down indoors lived. So he wrote the advice down. Lie flat and wait for it to settle. 470 years ago. Flood. The National Weather Service puts the number at 6 inches. 6 inches of moving water takes a grown adult off their feet. 2 feet of it carries away a pickup truck. 6 inches. In July of 1931, 7 cyclonic storms crossed the Yangtze Basin against a normal average of 2. That single month delivered 1.5 times the region's average rainfall for an entire year. Water covered about 70,000 square miles of central China. Wuhan went under and stayed under for more than 100 days, with streets standing in 10 feet of water and parts of the city in 20. On the 26th of August, the canal dikes at Gaoyu Lake gave way in the dark. 19,300 people drowned in their sleep in that one town. Then the water stayed. Somewhere near 2 million people died. And here's the part that almost never gets said. They did not mostly drown. Around 70% died of disease afterward, and malaria alone killed an estimated 300,000. Bishop Edward Galvin walked the refugee camps that autumn and wrote that on all sides, heartbroken people were quietly dying of starvation, and that malaria, dysentery, typhoid, cholera, and smallpox spread like a prairie fire from camp to camp. On one plain, the water did not fully drain until the following spring. Heatwave. There is no footage of this one. There is nothing to point a camera at. There is only air that is too hot for a body to cool itself in. You cool down by evaporating sweat. When the air is already close to saturated, the sweat runs off you instead of evaporating, and your core temperature climbs with nothing to stop it, nothing to film. In August of 2003, that happened across Europe. France hit 111 degrees. Paris had its warmest night since records began in 1873, a low of 78 degrees. The nights are what kill. A study led by Jean-Marie Robin counted 71,449 excess deaths across 16 countries that summer, nearly 45,000 of them in August alone. In France, the death rate rose 70% among people over 75 and 122% among people over 95. Under the roof. A case control study found what actually decided who died. Being confined to bed, working a manual job, and having your bedroom directly under the roof, which multiplied the risk by 4. Bodies were held in refrigerated trucks and in the cold stores of a wholesale food market outside Paris. On the 3rd of September, 57 of them were buried unclaimed. France's Director General of Health had resigned 2 weeks earlier. Meteor Impact. Every other thing in this video is made by the Earth. This one was delivered 66 million years ago. A rock somewhere between 6 and 10 miles across came in over what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico at an angle of 45 to 60 degrees. The worst angle. That angle matters more than the size. A steep hit throws 2 to 3 times more climate-changing gas into the sky than a straight-down hit. Roughly 325 billion tons of sulfur and 425 billion tons of carbon dioxide. The energy released was more than 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. Nobody knew where the crater was. In 1978, a geophysicist named Glenn Penfield, flying magnetic surveys over the Yucatan for the Mexican oil company, saw a half circle in his charts. He presented it in 1981 to an audience of about 20 people. The data belonged to the oil company, and the discovery vanished for 9 years. It was the dark. The dinosaurs did not die in the impact. Fine dust hung in the air. Photosynthesis shut down for close to 2 years, and the surface cooled by as much as 27 degrees. Roughly 3/4 of every species on Earth went extinct. How long the dark lasted is still argued, and the published estimates run from 2 years to more than 30. So here is a question for you. Look at what actually killed the most in this video. It was not the fire tornado, which killed 1 man. It was not the record hailstone, which killed nobody at all. It was a cliff of soil, a river that would not go down in 3 weeks of hot air. And the one with no footage at all is the one that still kills more Americans in a year than any other kind of weather. 7 more types did not fit in here. Tell me in the comments which one you want first.